This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Welcome, Talk Catholic, the website.com, your host, Tim Kilcoyne. No agendas here, just the straight and narrow, through Mary to Jesus, the Catholic faith proclaimed and preserved. Hope to see you here every week. TalkCatholic.com with Tim Kilcoyne. Happy Easter. He is risen. Jesus. Now, go and tell the world. As the high priest at the end of the movie Jesus of Nazareth says, looking at the empty tomb, now it all begins. Go and walk around and tell people about your Easter joy. Sounds a little too simple, doesn't it? I think it's called Talk Catholic. There happens to be a particular priest they came across during Lent. His name is Father Lawrence Carney, and he spends much of his time simply walking around. Now there's a simple new ministry for any of the faithful to embrace, and religious, or perhaps not all religious, those in a monastic order, but those of the apostolic charism for sure. Perhaps all diocesan priests to familiarize themselves with their local surroundings by simply walking around in their garb. Got to do that. And let the people speak. Let them speak to you, the shepherd that they want to get to know. This is exactly what Father Carney is doing as he tries to spread a devotion called the Holy Face. Precisely that miracle that was on the veil of Veronica, a miraculous imprint of the crucified Lord's face. And I'm thinking of my good friend, Brother Alphonsus Maria, slave of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, who did his own little investigation years ago, and he has a beautiful replica copy of that picture. It is the very one that Saint Therese is holding in a famous picture, Saint Therese of the Child Jesus and the Holy Face of Jesus. But this heroic priest, Father Lawrence Carney, he's just written a book called The Secret of the Holy Face, the devotion destined to save society. How's that for challenging the world? This is a long time, age-old devotion that, like the Rosary, almost fell into extinction at a certain time in church history. But there is a organization, the Arch Confraternity of St. Martin, in honor of St. Martin of Tours. And you might want to go to Martinians.org. Martinians, MARTINIANS.org. If you want to enroll in this confraternity, he's trying to enlist about 1 million before he dies. Be specific in your goals. For Easter, magnificent. You know, this is what St. Francis did. You know, he walked around and talked about Jesus. How radical. How simple. I dare you, and then call me and I'll join you. I said that to a particular Franciscan not too many months ago. Why don't you and I just walk around town together and do lunch as often as we possibly can in as many different places? And you being in the garb, believe me, this is what St. Francis did. They didn't, again, for those of an apostolic charism, not a monk, this is the calling, to put your face now out in the open. Because if there's any Easter truth, it is that his face now has to become your face. In the open. And if it's hunting season, stand tall and not go hiding into the cubicle somewhere. No. Okay. In fact, I would highly recommend that as your post-Easter assignment, check out some of the great movies such as The Robe, Barabbas, more recently, The Final Inquiry, Risen, Mary of Nazareth. How about The Apostle Paul? Also the movie Peter and Paul. There's some just really great movies. Ben-Hur, of course. We really should get a glance at first century Christianity because we're apparently there. I got a glance just recently. A senator lashed out what we might call a good old moral chiding for our Department of Justice regarding, let's call it, the rounding up of traditional Catholics by the FBI. I mean, should we start digging our catacombs now? Welcome to first century Christianity. Wow. I never thought I would see it in my lifetime. And God bless this particular senator who was not even Catholic, but with an appreciation for Latin Mass churchgoers to be able to freely worship and express themselves in a place called America. Indeed, this is the America we want to fight for. But if we don't offset all of it by the reality of Jesus risen, there's something that the wokesters will not be able to refute. Indeed, down with woke because God spoke. Yes, has to be the flying banner for all time. And he and his church will be with us for the duration, while all these passing anti-Christian fashions of ideology, evil thought, go by the wayside ever so gradually, but do a lot of damage in between, no question about it. And may we please make that time extremely short, starting at your public school. No matter how much they try to change language, he rose from the dead, and it made a difference. And here we are talking about him on radio 2023 years later. One solitary life, as the poem says, most obscure during his time. And yet, a lot of people, namely the apostles leading the way, walked around and converted the known world. As Professor Peter Crave says better than anyone, it's funny how 12 men could convert the known world, and over 1 billion Catholics are having one heck of a difficult task. Let's take a page out of Father Lawrence Kearney's book, The Secret of the Holy Face, the devotion destined to save society, and start walking around with our faith and our face and making it visible and verbal. We can't hide anymore, or we will be in those catacombs, okay? You have to come out, and God will provide. Remember his encouragement to Moses, don't you worry, I'll take care of the words. So, yes, we have to do our homework and know our faith, but in the moment, God always provides. That's certainly been my experience in ministry, formal or informal. When the critical time arrives that I've got to put forth Jesus' best face, his holy face, he provides. He comes through. So don't worry about it. You don't have to be a PhD, all right? If there's anything that we don't want to be, it is indeed a PhD these days. All right, nothing against quality education, of course. So I want to quickly get back now to our little mini-series on the Synod on Synodality, specifically their working document for the continental stage, which is the second nebulous stage of the Synod that might never end, which could well put good, faithful, traditional-minded Catholics into those catacombs if we don't watch out and be leaven for our hierarchy. God's people are at a critical moment where they're going to have to speak, likely sooner than later. Just a few brief points, and then we'll continue on with our book review. You Shall Stand Firm with Father William Casey, Preserving the Faith in an Age of Apostasy. So just some continued reflections on the article written, very excellent article by Matt Gaspers in Catholic Family News called Continuous Aggiornamento. And we left off on the following paragraph that said, the idea was that if the Church updated her manner of expression according to forms of modern thought and used the medicine of mercy rather than that of severity, this would attract the minds and hearts of modern men who are supposedly inclined to condemn the false teachings, which Pope John the 23rd acknowledged, but did not want to censor. Matt says, in reality, modern men are just as inclined to error and sin as men of past generations due to the effects of original sin. And then he refers to a particular professor, Romano Amerio, whom Pope John appointed to the Council's Central Preparatory Commission, this is Vatican II, and he wrote a very sobering assessment of the Pope's misplaced optimism 20 years later after the close of the Council, which I think is especially relevant for us today. He says, this optimistic interpretation of events, asserting that at last era is about to recognize and correct itself, is difficult enough to accept in theory, but it is also bluntly refuted by facts. Events were still maturing at the time the Pope spoke, but in the following decade they came to full fruition. Men did not change their minds regarding their errors, but became entrenched in them instead, and gave them the full force of law. The public and universal acceptance of these errors became obvious with the adoption of divorce and abortion. The behavior of Christian peoples was entirely altered thereby, and their civil legislation, until recently modeled on canon law in formerly confessional Catholic nations, was changed into something completely profane, no longer having a shade of the sacred about it. On this point, papal foresight indisputably failed. Matt Gaspers then goes on to refer to Pope Paul VI in passing on the baton of aggiornamento, updating to the world. He called it the guiding principle of the council, and he specifically said, secular humanism, revealing itself in its horrible anti-clerical reality, has in a certain sense defied the council. The religion of the God who became man has met the religion of man who makes himself God. And what happened? Was there a clash, a battle, a condemnation? There could have been, but there was none. Oh boy. And yes, I might add, because they said nothing about everything immoral by way of the Ten Commandments, about the church's age-old teachings regarding the absolute all-out assault morally ushered in by a thing called the 60s sexual revolution. And let's not forget prayer dismissed from the public school. And I want to just rattle off some very quick statistics that are the real fruit of updating to the world. From the book review we did months ago, Deadly Indifference by Eric Sammons, in the back of the book, in his appendix, he has some frightening stats between 1970 and 2019. Infant baptisms, a 46.5% decline. Number of priests, 39.3% decline. Number of religious sisters, 73.6% decline. Marriages, 67.7% decline. Oh, what else do we have here? Percent of Catholics who attend Mass every week, 61.6% decline. And let's not forget the thousands of parishes closed over the last 15 years. Ladies and gentlemen, could 2023 be the return of the public debate? If ever there was a need right now to put statistics and facts front and center, the errors didn't change. And the church's hierarchy not addressing the moral errors created an utter disaster for decades to come. The updating guiding principle of the council failed, plain and very simple and straightforward before you. Please do tell our baby boom leaders from the 1970s, still stuck in that time warp. And the stats prove it. And by the way, I might call attention, given the era of wokeism, that the changing of language really began by our own hierarchy when they saw that there was no fruit. They didn't want to be called liberals, so they changed it to progressives. We're more forward-looking. You'd have to be, because you didn't want to look back on what happened. Indeed, Mother Mary Angelica was most generous in her use of the word liberal, for very good reasons. Could we have one more sermon from Mother Angelica right now on the changing of language when reality doesn't suit us? Matt Gaspers then relays that Pope Benedict XVI reflected on the word aggiornamento during an address in honor of the 50th anniversary of the opening of Vatican II back in October 12, 2012. And he said, Christianity must not be considered as something of the past, nor must it be lived with our gaze ever turned back, because Jesus Christ is yesterday, today, and forever. Council was a time of grace in which the Holy Spirit taught us that the Church in her journey through history must always speak to the people of today. I say speak to the people of today. That doesn't mean become one with them. Granted, according to Benedict, this aggiornamento does not mean a break with tradition, nor does it involve reducing the faith, debasing it to the fashion of the times, or what pleases us. Matt then points out that basically there are those progressives, I guess we'll call them. They try to see continuity only with the church post-Vatican II. This is an unbelievably important break with the deposit of faith. As I say repeatedly, 2023 years and unchanging, because you can't have a change in the thrust of Holy Mother Church all of a sudden from everything that was before it. And even the term synodality, it wasn't even in the documents of Vatican II. But now we are a synodal church. Matt says that the Synod on Synodality is meant to be an extension of the Council, a major push to more fully implement the problematic ecclesiology of Vatican II throughout the Universal Church. And what is more, it seeks to push the ecclesial envelope even beyond the problematic letter and spirit of Vatican II, as evidenced by the Synod's latest document. You see, ladies and gentlemen, this is why those fully on board with, quote unquote, the spirit of Vatican II? Well, they have to be, because they can't be on board with the letter of the deposit of faith leading up to it. So here we go. Let's change the language. Again, the foreshadowing of our time. It's all about the spirit, our interpretation of things, but not the actual truth of Holy Mother Church and her teachings. This is a revolution, as it was considered back then by my parents and grandparents, that's for sure, who had to see the dismantling of the altar and altar rails and pulpits out the window, and all the rest of the dismantling that took place. That was completely unwarranted, was not called for by the Council Fathers. It was all the interpretation of things according to the spirit of Vatican II. What goes around comes around, and thankfully the curtain has been lifted. And that's exactly what we're going to continue to do right here at WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. We'll get back to our book review now with Father William Casey, You Shall Stand Firm. Okay, now in our last session before our Easter show, we were in chapter 9 in You Shall Stand Firm, Preserving the Faith in an Age of Apostasy. And the title of the chapter is Scandals in the Church, Ruin of Souls. And Father showed us some serious manhood and humanity in expressing his extreme disgust and anger about any of these scandals within the church. And God bless him for showing us that kind of blunt, honest manhood. I have said to so many people after hearing about any of this, post-2002 anyway, that all we're waiting for is some clergy members high up to get ripping mad about an egregious, heinous, abominable sin. And how few there are that have come forth publicly to show that straightforward humanity. Let's remember what the dysfunctional sins of family life are. Divert, deflect, deny when it comes to serious wrongdoing and sin. No different amongst the clergy. And an honest, angry reaction, yes, righteous indignation it's still called, and it could go so far to get some closure and put the darn thing behind us. But no, here we are, this many years later, still talking about it. And why is that? Divert, deflect, deny. Because the overwhelming majority of these cases had nothing to do with children. It had to do with the acting out of homosexual inclinations amongst in-house church workers, whether they be clergy or lay, and whether they be in parishes or seminaries, or those that may have already been in the seminary over them as predators. And this has continued to be kept under the radar beyond belief. And I once again can speak volumes on my personal knowledge of this, but we'll just leave it at that. Getting back to Father Casey's analysis, he did make note theologically about our Lord and the fact that he chose Judas, knowing what was going to happen. And he suggests that that was our Lord's way of saying that scandal will always be with us, and it will be in the church. Wolves in sheep's clothing, to be most scriptural. It will be at the highest level in the church. Father Casey says, recall that our Lord's harshest words in the gospel were not directed toward the Pharisees, to the Sadducees, to the Herodians, or to the Romans, but towards those who cause scandal. Scandal so often destroys the lives of the victims of sexual abuse. Scandal destroys the faith of weak souls. Scandal destroys the public image of the church and of the priest in particular. Scandal makes the work of evangelization very difficult and sometimes even impossible. Ultimately, scandal leads to the loss of souls. St. Thomas Aquinas, the angelic doctor, taught that the lay faithful have the absolute right to expect and to demand sound doctrine and good moral example on the part of the clergy and church leaders. When the faithful do not receive these things, they have the right to press for the reform of the church and the removal of corrupt elements. This is also in Canon 212 of the Code of Canon Law, which says, according to the knowledge, competence, and prestige which they possess, they, the Christian faithful, have the right and even at times the duty to manifest to the sacred pastors their opinion on matters which pertain to the good of the church, and to make their opinion known to the rest of the Christian faithful, without prejudice to the integrity of faith and morals, with reverence toward their pastors, and attentive to the common advantage and dignity of persons. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, we are the church militant, and we as lay people have the sensus fidelium, that common sense of the faith. to know when something is terribly wrong. And we demand an action plan, not just talk and then hope that it goes away. No, I'm looking at a book before me. It's called The Nation Will Follow: First-Hand Experiences Fighting the Deep State by retired Colonel John Mills. This is not a book of theory. It is a book of concrete strategy to root out corruption. This book has a political focus, but lay Catholics could easily and equally come up with a parallel book of practical, concrete strategies for the church, especially the parish. On the back of the book it says, and I'd like to replace a few words to suggest the same battle plan is now necessary. He says, by now we have almost all heard of the deep state. Let's call that the deep church. Citizens across America are looking to join the fight against the shadowy forces that look to strip away our liberty. Well, instead of citizens, let's say parishioners. Colonel Mills answers the question on everybody's lips. How do I fight back? Secure your county, and the nation will follow. And I say, secure your parish, and the people will follow. It is also no coincidence that the toleration of scandal within the church has now led to a toleration of heresy. I was just watching The World Over recently, as Raymond had on a couple of bishops, and they were calling into serious question some of the comments made by one particular cardinal in our country about radical inclusion for those of sexual license, as another one of these primary concepts of the synod on synodality. Well, some of the remarks made by this particular cardinal were out and out heretical. And unless we're going to just live out the Akita message, which talked about cardinal against cardinal, bishop against bishop, which is the time that we are in, you can't have that kind of disunity within the church. It is not acceptable, nor a matter of continuous dialogue infinitum that gets nothing done but leads to more division. A concrete strategy needs to be attended to by the cardinals themselves to take action, and this is exactly on the advisement of Cardinal Robert Bellarmine, doctor of the church. Okay, that yes, there are leaders that can excommunicate themselves by their belief system, or tyrannical measures like weaponizing obedience, especially regarding our canceled priests, quote unquote. Never to forget the attempted kiboshing currently of the Latin Mass. So the fact is, they're already heretics, but they're not publicly acknowledged as such by the process of canon law, and that all has to be initiated by the cardinals themselves. There has to be a battle plan, always. Against Judas, this all really comes down to getting the priestly profile correct. And I say it's a combination of Marine and holy man of God. They go together like my father. When I was knocking on the door of seminary, I was always looking for Dad, and I couldn't find him. Now I know why. All-American man of God who seeks to fight evil wherever it is, at all times, in season and out. This is the character profile that the psychologists at the seminaries should only be highlighting. Yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen, this is what we've been most lacking for decades, and that's why we get nothing by way of concrete strategies to root out evil, which directly includes scandal encompassing heresy or tyrannical measures. Please read up on Cardinal Robert Bellarmine. So who's going to change the deep church's profile of a priest? It will be up to lay groups like the Men of St. Joseph or any other wonderful lay Catholic groups of men and or women. Let's never forget what Mothers Against Drunk Driving did at a time everybody was simply turning the other way to adolescent drinking. There is such a thing as positive moral peer pressure. Just look at what we did with smoking. So strong men and women of God, take the fight to the parish and demand reform. It is always about the holy profile, which we do our best to define right here at WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. Let your Easter light shine. God bless. Let your light shine. That is what it's all about here at WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. But we need to hear your story. You want your voice to be his voice. That is making the faith known to others. Please, my number is 877-625-3727. Tim Kilcoyne, TalkCatholic.com. St. Mother Teresa told us, your ministry is your work right where you are. Grab on to this microphone. God bless.